Welcome back to Meeting of the Minds, a great economic debate. We're coming to you from the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg, where we have convened some of the biggest voices from the South African business and investment fraternity, as well as leading policy drivers to share their views on South Africa's economic future. Before the break, we mentioned that we had asked our audience members to give us their views on what they regarded as the ideal economic policy ideology for South Africa. The results are as follows. Mixed economy, 52%. Capitalist, 46%. Socialist, 2%. Communist, 0%. Let's get some more questions from our audience this evening. It's all about audience interactivity. We've got the best minds for you. Mr. Leon Lowe from the Free Market Foundation, you're up next, sir.
Yes, I always find it fascinating that the matter gets debated at all, because the evidence is now completely overwhelming and actually beyond informed debate. All of the indices that measure economic systems, there are about 6 of them, competitiveness index, economic freedom index, doing business index, show something that is just not debatable, which is freer economies have fuller employment, higher living standards, higher growth, all of the things the minister says he wants, local industrial development. So I'm always fascinated that it even is subject to debate, because the evidence is conclusive. There is evidence as conclusive as evidence ever gets in social science. There is a complete correlation between the degree of economic freedom and the degree of not just jobs, prosperity, growth, incomes, living standards, but other things too, low crime, environmental cleanliness, literally number of endangered species. No matter, there are about 200 indices in the world measuring human and environmental conditions. All of them have a higher score in freer economies. So I'm just amazed that it's even the subject of discussion.
Minister, why is it still the subject of discussion?
I think for a start, I would probably want to take issue with the various polls that were mentioned as a source of scientific knowledge. But let's leave that aside. If you look carefully at the policies and proposals of the Communist Party, we would say that the immediate task now is to advance and deepen the national democratic revolution, which in fact it does envisage a mixed economy. So you'll probably find us in a different slot to the one you imagine. But I think the point I really wanted to make was that I think if you look at the lessons of economic history, and you look at every single successful economy that has moved from being an underdeveloped economy dependent on primary product production into something like a developed industrialized economy, or even taking steps towards that, they have never followed, I think, the kind of prescriptions which the Free Market Foundation would suggest. On the contrary, they've all had strong developmental states. And that's true of any of the emerging markets you care to name in the world today. Certainly it's true of China. So I think that that's the lesson that we need to absorb from economic history, because for us the challenge is not simply to sit where we are with the accumulation path that we've had driven by private interests and by private profit seeking. If that is going to drive our economy in the future, we're going to stay where we were. We're going to stay on the path that we've been on, and that is not a path that can deliver a solution to the problems of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So I think that the developmental state is an absolute imperative. Whether we can create one or not is the political challenge that lies ahead, and that we've got to do it much more expeditiously than we have done up to now is undoubtedly an imperative for us.
Let's get some more voices from the floor, and a fellow female. Please take the stage.
Thank you, Bronwyn. I'd like to ask a question following on from what the Minister said, that one of the challenges we've got in terms of changing the structure of the economy is to move away from a commodity-based, take the stuff out of the ground and export it, to creating greater beneficiation. Without giving my age away, studying economics at university, this is something that was discussed decades ago. So my question to the panel is, what will the country and policymakers and people practically in business, what could and should and will we do differently to create greater beneficiation in the economy? Thank you.
Beneficiation, the big debate topic. Nikki.
Yes, I mean, we're a little bit undecided on that. You're right, it was a very, very key issue in previous governments, and certainly in the 70s and the 80s. So, you know, it clearly is something that we're not entirely so convinced of. If you're talking about taking mineral wealth and then beneficiating that, that is, of course, a very capital-intensive form of development. At the same time, it's also a very energy-intensive form of development. We don't have sufficient energy capacity, and we really want to see an economy where the growth is a little bit more labor-absorbing of nature. So we're not convinced that pushing one industry and picking one type of growth so strongly and throwing all the incentives behind that is necessarily the answer. There we would step back and we would say the market actually is best at selecting those industries where there's a competitive advantage and where there is a likelihood that we can see stronger growth and certainly employment going forward. So we would be very hesitant about that, and strategically, given what we've got, we're not sure whether it will actually work.
General Secretary, I see you leaning forward intently.
No,
you want to respond.
I prescribe fully to what we have been taught in the university. That's a correct line, and that's what I've been trying to advocate here. Beneficiation of our mineral deposits and building industrial base out of it. I think that the experience, Mr. Lowe, of the extraction model, where we just came in through colonization and identified where we can mine, build the road to the nearest harbor, and send everything to Europe and now to China, is a model that have not worked for South Africa because it is not helping us to develop as a country. Beneficiation should be the way to go. Government is not playing a more, in my view, Rob, a more decisive leadership in relation to forcing the mining companies to abide with the agreements that they have reached with the state in relation to what they're going to be doing to beneficiate in South Africa and to build industrial base in South Africa based on the fact that South Africa is sitting on so much in terms of the mineral deposits. Government have been very slow itself to lead the process of beneficiation. In fact, government only developed an industrial strategy plan about 2 years ago in April 2010. What it did, unfortunately, was to follow Mr. Lowe and your prescription for 16 years. Free market foundation, fix the macroeconomic environment, sign agreements left and right and center, not based on any study of what we want to achieve at industrial base, sign agreement at GATT and even agreeing to classifying South Africa as a developed country, left, right, and center neoliberal policies that have grounded us to where we are today. We need to move away from that. And one of the best way of moving away from that is to get a stronger trade and industrial development policy that is going to be guided by strong leadership that is going to punish the mining industry for moving slow in terms of beneficiation.
Mr. Bumbuzo, you've been silent for a little while, and then Herman, if you can add your voice.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I think we all agree as a country, high unemployment and our growth is totally unacceptable as we speak, and we just cannot really hide from that fact. But I think for us to really believe that South Africa, the last 16, 18 years, has really been following a free market economy, honestly, I think it's not really true. I mean, if you really look at the labor situation, which is one of the biggest risks this country actually faces, where for the last 18 years, actually, for the country, we created a perception to the masses of our people, the poor, that the business community is the enemy of the people. That is why we've now come out with this punitive legislative framework, because our legislative framework on a labor side, unfortunately, it's not really employment friendly. It actually discourages entrepreneurs. It discourages the business people from hiring.
Herman, you've thrown the cat among the pigeons here. Labour legislation. We've got many takers. Jabu first, then General Secretary.
Yeah, I think firstly we need to recognize where we're at. Anything that's gonna create jobs, that's gonna start to allow people to earn, deal with poverty and address inequality, we should do. If industrialization is the route, we must also recognize that I support the view that we must add value to things that we produce. But we must also, that must be accompanied by where we at, whether we've got the skills, whether business does see that giving a return. Because at the end of the day, you can't legislate where money should go. Investors are going to invest where they're going to optimize their return.
General Secretary, now that we know each other a little better, can I call you Zweli from here on?
That's how everybody calls me. The day someone in business shows me or us in the labor movement a clause in the Labor Relations Act or basic conditions or employment equity, health and safety that says, you see, this particular clause is the one that makes us to be unable to employ more people. I will say, let's talk. Because then that's what I will say, if it is if indeed that particular clause or clauses are the stumbling blocks to people being able to hire and to fire, then I will say there's a discussion. But as soon as somebody takes a broad statement without ever mentioning a single example, but a statement that is calculated to say that, well, we've got to basically go back, roll the clock to the days when managers used to stand in the passage and say, you are fired without any due process, then that's where we will never find an agreement with us.
Mr. Mabuza, you are straddled by Mr. Mashaba and Zweli. You have got to stand up and speak.
We in business certainly don't want an environment where there's weak unions. We want strong unions that can deliver their side of the bargain. We also want an environment where, with a strong partner being labor, we can sit down and point out that where we're at now, the choice of being unpaid and earning something less than what is currently being called minimum is there for all of us to see. I don't think the answer is in shouting. It's to sit down and say, maybe there's no clause. Maybe there's a perception that there is a view that says, given our current situation, there are things that we might do that are different in the now. We need to sit down and be sure that workers are not exploited. That's your job. Make sure they're not exploited, be strong and represent their interests, make sure the working conditions are right, but we want to be in a position to have a flexible environment that recognizes the cyclical nature and the structural nature of our economy. In the hotel business, for instance, when the hotels are empty, we can't be employing people when there is nobody to generate income from to pay them. But we can't shout about that. We need to sit down and say, in this particular situation, given our now, are there no other creative ways in which we can sit down and say, let's create employment, not super paying employment, employment as a minimum.
Nikki, I haven't forgotten you. I haven't forgotten you. I'm coming back in a moment. No. I'm going back to the minister.
Let me just say on this one that I think that the most successful models of industrial economies are those which draw on the wisdom, experience, and the input of their workers in a cooperative manner. I think that they are the models of continuous improvement, those that draw workers into decisions about the way in which production is organized and so on. Those are the most successful models. And those models have to go along with some recognition of the rights of the workers and of them being part of a team. I think that the old model of the boss telling the workers what to do is not that of industrialized, successfully industrializing economies. And so I think that's the first point I'd make. The second point is that we have in South Africa a model of social dialogue around very important issues around the direction of the economy, around things like localization, which was mentioned earlier by the General Secretary, around the green economy, around skills development, and so on. I think that our challenge now is to make sure that when we do reach those accords as a result of social dialogue, we actually implement them in a way that delivers the results. I can't agree more with the General Secretary that we've actually got to get this approach of recognizing the importance of decisions, not just by individual consumers, but more importantly by procurement officers in public as well as the private sector around taking the decisions in favor of supporting local production and local products. That's something which we've actually got to generate much more widely. And I think those are the sort of things that come from a much less adversarial, much more harmonious, much more cooperative environment between business and labor. And I think all of that is the way that we have to move forward in the future. That's part of the process of taking our economy into a radically different direction to the one which it's been operating on up to now.
Nikki, thanks for your patience.
I had nothing meaningful to say. I was just saying that the business people have been given an open door, an invitation to find a clause. So I suggest you should go and find that clause. There has to be one, because clearly the labour market isn't working. We have an unacceptably high level of unemployment, and we do not have the flexibility, and nor are we perceived to have flexibility in the labour market.
We should insert the clause that says we should have flexibility.
In fact, I think you really look at our fail as a country the last 18 years to produce entrepreneurs, in particular black ones. I think it's this whole issue about us actually emphasizing on the social issue. I think it's so simple as to why people go into business. Why do people go into business? An entrepreneur in Alexander or in Venda, why do they actually go into business? And the tragedy of that situation is that we've given our people out there this impression that they must go into business to help others. I think it's such a fallacy, such a wrong perception that we
You mean they go into business purely to make money?
Yes, you go into business to make money, and in the process of making money, that's when you employ people, and that's when you need the labor, you need government to come out with the legislative framework that there's fairness, there's proper governance, and so forth. But I think let us not really mislead our people to think that they're going to business because there's high unemployment in Alexander. That businessman, the guy and woman in Alexander, when they go into business, they want to go into business because they want to make money.
Jabu, I have to reiterate, I am very glad that you are seated between Mr. Mashaba and Zweli. If he had leant over a little further, he would have whacked him. Yes,
but
General
you're telling
Secretary.
the truth.
Rightio. I've got a question from the audience here. So.
But I want to just say this. Indeed, the day business come, not with rhetoric, to say this clause and this one is what is the problem. We will say, let's talk. Okay. But we're coming from the process yet again. Throughout this year, we have been negotiations with business where we send our heaviest guns in terms of leadership. Unfortunately, they send their most junior HR people to come and engage. They can't point out the clauses. And now the bill is in Parliament, and we're going to have more and more battles in Parliament on the basis of what is contained in the bills. But it was not on the basis of serious engagement by business. They send their junior people to come and engage. The second point that I feel that I must make is that, of course, all of us recognize the extent of the crisis of unemployment, but also we must emphasize the word and inequalities in our society. Because as soon as we don't mention that unemployment and inequalities together, we're likely to find wrong solutions to the crisis that we have. Our crisis is that of poverty that is afflicting the overwhelming majority of our people in the country, and which is the product of both unemployment and massive income inequalities in particular. Now, the solution to that can't be the race to the bottom. It can't be an ideology that says, oh, be happy that you have a job. You're making a good example about what is happening in the hotel industry, and you then say there must be flexibility. There can be no better example of the extent of flexibility in the labor market of South Africa than in the hotel industry. We must check who is cleaning your rooms, who is serving you in your restaurant.
Zweli, can I take the debate back?
And you must ask them how much are they earning.
I'm taking it back. I'm taking it back, sir. You've got your question.
Well,
I'm Ruben Dlamini from a company called Dumehlezi Warehousing and Transportation. I have a question that I would like to direct specifically to the Honorable Minister in Cape Town, as well as our Honorable General Secretary. It is very, encouraging to note that we all are for a situation in our country where we promote jobs and, a growing economy. I would like assistance in terms of any programs that are in place, educational programs that are directed towards educating, especially unionized formations, about the type of impact the country has when economic assets are destroyed or banned. And if there is any program that is directed towards that angle, I would be very happy to understand progress. If there is no program like that, I would be inspired to understand, are there any studies that are being conducted in terms of the impact?
I'm going to take it from here. We are cognizant of time. We're running out of it.
Obviously, we are extraordinarily challenged by the crisis at hand in South Africa. It's a societal problem. I don't want to in any way, anybody to believe that this is a union problem. Let me tell you, we conducted a study amongst COSATU members in the run-up to the Congress we had in September. And one of the most devastating things to come out of it was an assertion by 50% of COSATU members who says that, look, during the strikes, we believe that violence is acceptable. It must be part and parcel of a negotiating strategy. 50%. And I think that that's what most of the society thinks. Another study was commissioned by the Wits University case amongst the people who are embarking on the service delivery protest. And I can't remember the percent of them, but a substantial number of them are saying as well, unless there is something, there is a smoke somewhere, the mayor will not come. So it is now in the psyche of the country that there must be something burning for you to be taken seriously. It requires a serious political education. I think the unions must do their part, just like the government, and everybody else in society to say, but violence can't be part of any solution moving forward.
I think we're all very cognizant. We're all very cognizant of Marikana and the national strikes unfolding at the moment. We are unfortunately running out of time, so I'm going to take this back to a lighter note and get a final concluding thought from each of my panelists this evening in terms of the one thing that they would each change to create jobs. You have one thing that you can change. General Secretary.
Well, we want to engage. That's the most biggest thing. Coincidentally, we're being called somewhere tomorrow to go and engage with the current crisis South Africa is facing as a result of the global challenge. It's engagement, but it's engagement at the most senior level. South Africa please don't send us your HR. South Africa has... South Africa,
if you don't feel safe, you can always come stand next to me.
South Africa do have lots of policies. And I think that we're failing the country because the leadership at the highest level is not directly involved in driving implementation of those policies. That's where the problem
Yeah, I agree. We do have a crisis in this space of unemployment, and we do need leadership and an institutional capacity to engage and honestly look for creative ways. Indeed, we may have to look at other models like co-determination, where this is for all of us. This South Africa is for all of us.
Herman.
I think the problem, you just can't really have one issue that would really address the problems facing this country. I think really something that is very close to my heart is this labor legislation. Remove this fear of business people from employing people, because it's actually a tragedy. Fix our education, because as much as I think you can liberalize your labor legislation, with the type of education that our people are receiving right now, it's actually a tragedy. So I think those will really be two of the issues that I would really like the country to really address as a matter of
Nikki, let's get your concluding thoughts.
I would absolutely agree with Herman on those two. I think they are critical. I will only add one more, as you asked from the beginning, and that is that we need to create certainty. We need to know, we need to have a vision of where we're going in the future, and we need to have certainty of the economic policies we are going to pursue to achieve that.
And Minister, finally to you in Cape Town, sir.
Well, I think that we're facing a crisis. Let's use the crisis as an opportunity for us to mobilize all our efforts behind the necessity of making structural changes in our growth path. I think we've identified what those are. I think we've identified a number of the key instruments of that. We need to be moving much faster, much more effectively, much more efficiently. We can do a lot better if we're all working together to bring about the necessary transformations.
I'd like to thank our panel for sharing their insights, and thank you for spending the time with us this evening. To our audience, thank you very much. On behalf of all of us at CNBC Africa, goodbye, and thank you for watching the inaugural Meeting of the Minds.